Afternoon, Alan.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm good.
Hello,
I see
everyone.
John and Tom. All right, let's go ahead and call to order. Madam Recording Secretary, can you please call the roll?
Chair Rogers,
Here.
Member Schwedhelm,
Here.
Member Sawyer.
Here.
All right, thank you so much. So as we've been living in for 2 years, this is a virtual meeting, so folks will be able to participate by hitting the raise hand feature on their Zoom for each of our items today. We'll start with our public comment for non-agenda items. Those are items that fall within the jurisdiction of the Long-Term Financial Policy and Audit Committee, but are not on today's agenda. So I'll go ahead and look to Zoom first and see if you're interested in providing a public comment for non-agenda items. Go ahead and hit the raise hand feature on your Zoom. Seeing none, I'll look to see if we had any emails, public comments on today's non-agenda item.
No emails were received.
Excellent. Let's go ahead and move on then to approval of the minutes. We have special meeting minutes from November 18th, 2021. Council members, did you have any amendments to those minutes?
I didn't have any amendments, but I was happy to see for the last time the acting title would be in front of Alan's name. So congratulations, Alan, on your new promotion. And it'll be the last minutes with acting Chief Financial Officer. So congratulations.
Thank you.
You've had enough experience with acting, and it's good to have you in the chair now. Congratulations.
Yeah, and I'm remiss in not congratulating you right off the top. Congratulations, Alan. And I know this committee knows you well, and we're really looking forward to working with you without the acting title. Seeing no amendments to the minutes, I'll see if there's any public comment on the minutes. And Madam Host, do we have any emails?
No emails were received.
All right. With that then, Alan, our Chief Financial Officer, if you'd move on to item 4.1, our mid-year budget performance.
Thank you, Chair Rogers. We'll just get going here. We can move over to the next slide, please. So this is our second quarterly update, which is our mid-year review, and we're focusing mostly on the general fund with this. We'll go over our general fund revenues and our expenditures. I'll talk a little bit about what we are proposing as a mid-year budget adjustment or amendment that will be in front of the council on February 15th. And then we'll talk about some next steps coming forward, both at the council and in this committee, and then have time for some questions. So next slide, please. So this is a slide that we put together for the first quarter presentation. It's a visual representation of our revenues, and basically what it does is it shows that most of our revenues, 53% of our revenues, are actually with sales tax and property tax, which is an important distinction as we go forward. Next slide, please. So this is the major categories, our second quarter actuals. So this is rolling up to be our mid-year and where we are in terms of revenues to go forward. So it's the year to date for all of these amounts. We will take a deeper dive on the three main revenue sources in the upcoming slides. I will point out a couple of things here. that's of interest. Some of these you'll see that have low percentages. Those are typically either in sales tax because our receipts are on a lag. Utility users tax, we tend to get some later in the year. I know with our permits, licenses and permits right now, they are trending extremely high. Those are our business license or our building permits, encroachment permits, and those things. So that is booming. We are still working on trying to come up with good trending information data with that to see if these are just front-end project revenues or if these are actually really good trends going forward. Regardless, we're going to go past our revenue estimates for this year. And then with intergovernmental revenue, this looks high to begin with. This reflects the Roseland annexation revenue that we get in from the county to help pay for our costs in maintaining the county. We get that in the first part of the year, so that will trend out through the rest of the year and look more normal as we go on. So, next slide, please. So moving into property tax revenue. So our first installment, well, let me say this. We typically have installments, the first one being about 55%, and the second installment in the springtime being 45%. That's how it will add up. Our first half installment, our first part installment was at 57%. And with that, we look to it to be about $1.5 million ahead of schedule. And so part of our budget amendment that we'll come to council with is recognizing that additional revenue. I will say, looking at trends, we've typically been off about that much. So what this should do is start getting us in line with where we are on an annual basis with property tax coming in. Next slide, please. So this is the biggie with sales tax. So what we're trying to do here is show a visual representation of how we are receiving tax. And we're looking at it on an average basis going back to try to match up with our actuals to see where we're trending. So we go back a few years, develop an actual or an average for where we would find things at either mid-year or the second quarter and see where we are. So with this, the first two bars show the amount of sales tax collected year to date through the second quarter. So it's showing the actual versus the average. So what we would, what this is showing is that our progress is going over our actuals, and that we're looking as we project out through the end of the year, we are expecting sales tax to be about $6 million higher than what we originally estimated. And what this does is falls in line with where we ended last year, where we were severely underestimating sales tax. It does show that our sales tax is continuing to come in at a strong pace, and it also fits in line with what our sales tax consultants are looking at their most likely scenario. So we do know that there are some issues that can impact sales tax. One of it being is the way Amazon and their fulfillment centers are now are now reporting their revenue. In other words, we used to be able to benefit more from the fulfillment center revenue within the county pool, but now, unfortunately, the cities or counties where those fulfillment centers are located, they are actually keeping the more of that revenue. That said, it's not affecting us that much, and we think that this is a reasonable amount to be able to bump our revenue up and make it more in a realistic online number or year-end number.
Alan,
Yeah.
Are we looking, what sectors, what's propping this up? Do we know what sectors are kind of out or are skewing up as opposed to flat?
Yeah.
And if you don't have it, I can, it's curiosity more than anything else.
Check my notes. So we are seeing things going up more in retail. Definitely online sales are still really helping us. Honestly, it's one of the things that I hate. We don't like it when gasoline prices go up really high, but it really does propel our sales tax because there is our sales tax associated with that. Those are those are some of those areas. We are starting to see the areas along the line of tourism and leisure starting to bump up. Earlier this morning, there was a economic outlook where the UCLA Anderson, the person that does that forecast, was giving a perspective of Sonoma County economic forecast. And what he was talking about in terms of those industries starting to come back online are a lot of go along the lines of what we're seeing in our revenue. And I'll talk about TOT a little bit later, but we're seeing things with our retail areas, our construction, and restaurants are starting to go well. But the one thing that is that we just need to we can't really pat ourselves on the back, but we've been very fortunate that in Sonoma County and our sales tax in general, we have really rebounded quickly from whatever recession that there was related to the pandemic. We snapped back really fast and are more so than a lot of other communities. So we're very fortunate in that regard.
Oh, are we able to separate brick and mortar from online sales? Is that an easy?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it might be, it concerns me that our local retailers, I'm wondering where they're standing as far as their sales taxes and whether or not they're rebounding as much as we would hope.
Right, and we do expect to see more of that, and we are starting to see more going into brick and mortar. It's the thing that the last couple of meetings that I've had with our consultants that we sort of go back and forth on is the expected trend is that online sales will not necessarily go down, but level out. And we should expect to see more brick and mortar retail sales happen as folks are more comfortable going into those establishments. So that is what they're expecting to see. I look at it kind of anecdotally, and I happen to love the convenience of just being able to order whatever it is online. So what I've challenged them to do is let's really dive into that and try to make sure that we are that we have good analysis of that going forward.
Thank you.
Next slide. So these are our other taxes, and we've it rolls into one large category, but we've broken them out here so you can kind of see where we've gone on. And what we can see here is that our VLF swap, that's on track, and that makes sense because that is linked with our property tax, so we are good with that. There's a substantial amount of franchise fees from PG&E that will come in April. So that is low now, but that'll pick up in the latter half of the year. The motor vehicle license fee, we received that in March, so then that will bump up there. Our historical trends with cannabis, looking at things on a quarter basis, shows that they tend to come in more in the spring, in the latter part. So while that is lower than what we would like, we don't expect that to be that it's going down in revenue. We'll keep an eye on it, but we expect to see that revenue pop up in the latter part of the year. The majority of our business tax will come in February and March. Right now, we're just in the filing period, so we never expect to see that at this part for this report. And real property transfer tax is doing phenomenally well. Again, that is a function of sales price and volume of sales, which are both going really well, and was mentioned in the forecast as well, the Anderson forecast, Sonoma County, that this continues to be a trend moving forward. So that wave continues. We are going to adjust our revenue accordingly at the mid-year to be better in line with what we're actually seeing. So we'll bump that up $2 million to about $5.5 million, and that should be fine. And then occupancy tax, which is a really good sign to see, is that it is on track. That was hit hard between that and recreation programs. Those two tax sources were hit extremely hard during the pandemic. So to see that coming back is a very good sign. In addition, and I think we talked about it later, but I'll mention it now. Part of what we should be able to see in occupancy tax is also a result of the short-term rental ordinance that we put in place. We have seen between 75 and 100 more TOT registrants as a result of that program. So we've seen the revenue, and I think the revenue in short-term rentals is about a little over $200,000 that came in. That's people that came in and pulled their permit and did all that. So they're starting to see revenue there. And part of that process is that those folks that pull that revenue need to register for TOT. So now we have them in our system, and we will expect revenue to come in from those short-term rentals that we weren't able to catch prior to this ordinance. So all of that is good news now, and even better news going forward in the future. Next slide. So moving on to expenditures. So where we are right about where we would think that we would be at this year. These expenditures do include the one-time signing bonus payouts that were part of the labor agreements that were recently approved by council. Those happened in November and December, so they're a part of this. What these expenditures don't include, or we're not really seeing yet, are the COLA increases that we'll start seeing in the latter half of the year as as we get more reporting on that. The general fund, some departments, as I was saying, they're expected to run high in the latter part of the year and then continue on. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. Services and supplies, these costs are a little bit less timely. Sometimes there's a lag on the invoice that's being paid and posted in our system. So these are things that we just all kind of look at, analyze on a micro level, but as we kind of pull back, we're seeing that we're right about where we thought we would be. There are some expenditures that will occur more in the spring, such as the animal control contract and things like that. So we'll see those pick up a little bit later. And some of the other anomalies that go on from lags in either expenditures or folks charging out their time being reflected in our system, those things will start to catch up as we go along. So we look at things at that macro level, and then we dive down into into more of the grittier numbers, and then we do our analysis based off of that. So right now, I would say that we're looking fine. There are some things that we are going to adjust at mid-year, and I'll go into that in a minute. But for right now, at that high level, we're doing fine. And I should probably talk about non-departmental. You see that as a negative. I'll just, I would assume there would be a question about that. There generally is. It's a function of a large negative number that we have in for general government administration. Non-departmental includes our general fund, liability and fire insurance, separation expenses, which are those things that we pay out and we reimburse the general fund departments that have a retirement or somebody exits the city and they have a payout. We hold all that money in non-departmental and then make them whole by the end of the year. We have some other county admin fees and some other things like that, and the animal shelter, like I mentioned. But the big part in there is the general fund administration cost, and this is something that we've done for about 5 or 6 years now. The total amount is $13.1 million. So all of these other expenditures, and there haven't been a lot, but it's hard to outpace that huge negative number. So to kind of explain what general fund administration is it reflects the share of the general government admin costs for the police department, fire department, public works, planning and economic development, and recreation and parks. Like I said, this is something that we put in place about 5 or 6 years ago, and it was a way to show what that cost is in those departments. The enterprise funds pay the general fund back for that cost through our overhead, through our cost allocation plan. Well, the cost allocation plan looks at all departments, and it looks at those general fund departments I mentioned, and it calculates what the general government overhead costs would be for them if they were a business department. So think of it this way. Think of it like the police department is a business, and there's typically an overhead that a business would need to have. And that's to, hire positions. HR is an admin department, finance is an admin department, city attorney's office those are general government admin departments. So what we wanted to do, what we started doing those years ago, is showing what that cost is reflected in even those general fund departments of what that general government overhead was. And so as a result, We put the positive amount in the department budgets, but we don't want to double count that. So we have a large credit in the non-departmental to offset that cost. So either I put you all asleep or you are contemplating questions on that. I'm happy to answer them to the best that I can. It is a little wonky. I don't know of very many cities that do this, but again, it was the idea of trying to be transparent, and we've been doing it for a while. To back it out now probably wouldn't make a lot of sense, so we just kind of run with it. It doesn't impact the general fund in any negative way. Like I said, it nets to zero, but it is just sort of representing it from a reporting basis.
Alan, does interdepartmental cost recovery, is that embedded in this, or is that a completely different situation? Whether
that's a different, that's not in this. That would be well, it hold on, let me look at here. These are, if you're talking about, yeah, this is just general fund. So no, the enterprise funds aren't included in this, and that's where the cost that comes back through intergovernmental revenue to us.
It is a little wonky, but you can. I'll make an appointment. You can explain it to me in your office.
Exactly. I could spend a few minutes or a few hours with that, or write it all up. I have insomnia, and it will.
We'll try to keep it to a half an hour.
Alan, plays over.
Alan, if we're gonna get wonky in any committee, long-term finance makes the most sense. So keep going.
I thought I'd give it a shot. All right. So next slide, please. So here is what we are proposing that you will see in February on the 15th in terms of budget adjustments or amendments to our current year budget. So as I mentioned before, we are seeing at least 3 major tax revenues that are that we feel comfortable bumping those up to reflect where their current trends are. So those 3 will total $9.5 million. I talked about those before and what our methodology is in going into that. This just provides a summary of where we are. So $9.5 million of extra revenue. And again, this is something that we heard very clearly during the labor negotiations and before we want to make sure that we have the most realistic and most likely revenue numbers that are out there. So unfortunately, the way that we develop our budget, we don't know what those year-end numbers are going to be. So we kind of do it as the best educated guess that we can of what the revenues are going to be in the current year. I think when we see that we are significantly off, that it makes sense that at mid-year, if we could justify that, to adjust those revenues in a way that that again is more reflective of what we believe we're going to get. It shows to our constituents and the departments and to you and the council of that realistic. It just basically gives us more transparency as we go through. Next slide, please. And in addition to the revenue adjustments, there are some expenditure adjustments we need to make. So on the one hand, while we are being transparent with our revenues, we also want to be transparent with our expenditures. And we do know that there is a cost associated with the labor agreements that we just approved. So we are, that cost estimate on the general fund side for those labor groups is going to be about $7.5 million. Now, there is potential for some of that to come back and turn back unspent appropriations at the end of the year. When we come up with our labor agreement costs, we base it off of all of the approved positions in whatever labor group that there is. We cannot get down to the individual. So if there's a vacant position, which we do unfortunately have a lot of vacant positions within both the general fund and citywide, those unspent appropriations will come back to the fund at the end of the year. However, that cost, eventually those positions will be filled and then that cost will move forward. But for right now, what we need to do is and we've calculated what the cost would be to have the current year cost, which if I remember correctly, it was the 3% COLA and then another 2.5% COLA that will hit in April. So the cost of all of those is what we are trying to capture with that $7.5 million amount. We also will add back to our budget a vacancy credit. So I mentioned before unspent appropriations related to vacant positions. Typically what we try to do is put a negative amount of credit in so that our budget isn't overly inflated. So we know that we're not at full employment. We know that we probably won't be at full employment. And so we can bump down that the full cost of salaries and benefits with this vacancy credit that realizes that we are not at full employment. So it's a way of offsetting those unspent appropriations at this part. Last year, we had removed that from the budget. It makes sense, again, from a transparency standpoint, to have that in there. So we are including it now at mid-year. There are some staffing changes, and these are partial appropriations of funds for that, and I'll explain later what the total cost will be. But there is a critical need, and while we didn't solicit this information, we were told loud and clear by some of the departments when we met with them that they are struggling in certain areas that made sense to deal with these positions now and not wait through the normal budget process and then add those positions if we were to do that beginning in July. So what this is a development review coordinator, buildings plans examiner, and a civil engineering tech. These are all in the planning and economic development area. These are all folks that are dealing with our development process and will help support reducing that backlog that we've had there. We are actually, and we will be throwing some contract cost help for them on that as well with our one-time monies discussion that will also be on the 15th. So what we are really trying to do is recognizing that there is a significant need for support, both on an ongoing basis and on a contract basis. And we are trying to address that early in the process and not through the normal budget process. We are also—
Chris, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
Alan, I appreciate those. What about the fire department and some of the plan checkers with the fire department? I know Chief Westrop has shared with us the several week backlog, and I know we had done some funding to try to address the immediate concern, but more of the long term. I'm surprised we don't see any fire department assets here.
Right. Well, we will be appropriating funds on the 15th with the one-time money appropriation that should help with the fire plans review. That was given the green light by council in study session, and we'll do the actual appropriation for that there. Again, what we wanted to do is we have a normal process, and we wanted to try to stick to that process as much as possible. I think the way that we were looking with it, and I hate speaking for the chief on this, but I think the thought is that we can put some of the contract money in there, and then if there are positions or whatever more that would come in, we would then augment that initial contract stuff through the positions going through the normal budget process. So that's the thought process with that.
Okay, yeah, my only interest is that if we're doing these, and I agree with all these ones, I hate to see one part of the system, the fire check, fall behind. So we do these investments, but yet we're not doing the system as a whole. So it sounds like hopefully we're getting that worked out.
Yes. And then the other one on this would be the human resources analyst. And I mean, if you think about it, we do have an issue with both reclassifying existing positions, hiring, doing that recruitment, or there needs to be bodies on hand to be able to do those things. This will help us be able to move through as the positions and reclassifications are approved by the council through the normal budget process. This puts the human resources department in a better place to be able to meet those needs from the department. We're looking at about a 3-month cost for those positions at about 150,000, figuring that if approved on the 15th of February, that it would take a little bit of time for them to get on, that most likely we would only see about the final quarter of the year of expenditures in that. So that's why the small amount there. There's a boiler line that has sprung a leak in the public safety building. That is, water is leaking out from that. That is not a good thing. This is something that we need to address urgently, so we are putting money at that. And then finally, the fire department overtime. So what this amount will do will bring up the overtime expenditure or budget for that department to be more in line of where they are normally trending. And this is their normal overtime. This is not strike team reimbursed overtime. But for when folks are out on injury or out for whatever reason, we need to bring people in to backfill that. That is done generally through overtime, and their overtime for the last few years has been significantly higher than what was budgeted. So we are trying to make a more realistic budget, and this will do that. So we expect this cost to be able to bump up to their normal overtime amount, and I think it'll probably be around $2 million. I'm not sure exactly what they have in right now, and that is an amount that we would expect that we would see in future budgets going forward. This is essentially bringing them up to where they need to be and where they will be going forward, and they will need to manage to that more realistic amount.
And Alan, I guess I'm always asking this kind of same similar question whenever we talk about overtime. Do we have the analysis of what the nexus point is in terms of the cost to hire additional staff versus the cost of overtime to the city?
Yeah, I don't have that right now. That is something that we can work on, and yeah, we'll obviously that is, it's a balancing act that we've been doing for a while, that it costs less to bring people on in overtime versus the cost of not only the salaries, but the benefits as well. So, but off the top of my head, I don't have that, where that tipping point is, where we say, you know, we just need to hire a bunch more people and have that worked out.
Yeah, I'd appreciate us keeping an eye on that and
Yeah.
continuing to do that analysis. And in particular, it'd be helpful for me, I think, and I suspect that the new city manager would find it helpful also to see, as our overtime budget has gone up, as we've been required to have more firefighters and police officers on in overtime situations, have we also seen an increase in terms of burnout, turnover, injuries, other types of, I don't want to call them hidden expenses because they're not particularly hidden, but I want to make sure that the long-term savings that we're having by having fewer pensions and fewer benefits that we're paying in perpetuity, that cost isn't actually negated by the immediate impact that we're seeing, and also the well-being of the employees as a result.
Yeah, that is a critical analysis that we need to do, and we will work with the fire department and other departments actually that are feeling the same thing. We do the same thing with police and in other areas. So this is, and you're correct. I know that's also something that the city manager is going to want to see as we start moving in past this first budget and into future budgets there, to have those types of metrics to be able to support going however we're going to do it, but to have that to back up our strategic decisions going forward.
Yeah, and I use fire and police, but obviously I also, the more that we get into this, the more that we use the data-driven approach, the more I want to make sure that we're including other departments where we know that we're having turnover, having a lot of folks out on injury.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if I could just add too, I know it's a meet and confer, but I think another data point is the overtime rate, whether it be FLSA rules or what the city currently pays. Because I think, Mr. Mayor, it does play into what you're saying. If people are working the 40 hours and then doing overtime above and beyond that, but if someone takes a week off 40 hours and then they get paid overtime, that issue that you just described may not be present. And it's just, again, additional data points to see which way future councils want to go.
Yeah. Next slide, please. So we also have, there are some costs and revenue that we need to recognize for other funds. So just as sales tax is doing well for the general fund, our special sales tax for Measure O is also trending well, and so we need to recognize that revenue as well. And so which we are doing, and which is shown here. We also have additional expenditures that that we are for the labor contracts. So what we've tried to do, at least with these funds, is that from the point of the labor contract and the revenue, we recognize the revenue and the amount that will cover the cost of the labor contracts. That's why you see that the revenue increase doesn't coincide with our normal 40-40-20 split on revenue. Is that we know that it's doing better than what it should do, which is great. And so we knew that we had these labor costs, and we just went and took a 1-for-1 offset to be able to help that. There is one additional item that's a Measure O related item that's not on this list, but you will see it at the council meeting, and that is there was some specialized radio equipment that fire is buying. This is an enhancement over what is currently we currently have, to the extent where it's such an enhancement that it does make sense to come out of the Measure O fund. That was about $650,000. They did have significant fund balance to be able to cover that. If you know that one of the things that fire has been able to do is not only cover the cost of their employees with Measure O, but also to be able to buy specialized equipment and other things through the fund balance that is in that fund. So they are using some of that for this. Those items went to the Measure O Citizen Oversight Committee on January 19th, and they were approved by them to go forward to the council. So we will bring this item along with the budget amendment. We folded them together, so those implementation plan changes will happen at that point. Also, we have a couple of increases due to MOUs for the water enterprise funds, both the water and the regional enterprise fund, of those amounts there. And next slide. So next steps. As I've mentioned ad nauseum, we are taking an item on the 15th to you guys that will deal with this mid-year budget adjustment. We will also have a separate item that will do the appropriation and spending plans for our one-time funds. And finally, we'll have our budget priorities public hearing. That's our chartered required public hearing where the community can give the council their budget priorities in advance of goal setting. So it'll be very finance heavy that night. I apologize in advance for that. And then in April, we will come back for the end of April, around the same time period that we are now. We will come back for our Q3 budget performance and be able to provide more outlook on where we are with our revenues and expenditures at that point. So let me sum up before we get to questions. So our revenue trends are in the general fund are looking good. They are, we're seeing that the tourism and leisure industry is starting to rebound, and that's reflective in not only our sales tax, but our TOT as well. Our short-term rental ordinance, as I mentioned, has resulted in additional TOT registrations, which will increase revenue in the future, both from the short-term rental permit side, but also in the TOT side, as we will start being able to recover TOT that we had previously not been able to get through short-term rentals. Let's see here. Our housing prices and sales volume continue at a very strong pace, and building permits related and related fees are also strong, and they seem to be continuing from where they were last year. We are working with planning and economic development to be able to develop a good sense of tracking mechanisms that should be able to allow us to predict those revenues going forward. And then expenditures. So from a budgetary perspective, we still have a deficit. And again, I make a distinction between budgetary deficit and end of year deficit, and that's largely due to our vacancy rate and our ability to how our revenues come in. So as you remember, we ended last year with an operating surplus when we thought that we had a significant deficit. Well, budgetarily, we do have a significant deficit, but operationally, because revenues have been coming in stronger and we've had vacancies, it's resulted in an annual surplus. Surpluses are great. I am big favor of surpluses. Where ultimately where we want to be is where we have a recurring operating surplus and we're not worried about vacancies helping that along. I will add that that if you look at what the ongoing MOU costs in the general fund after 2024, so when all of the contracted increases are done, it's about a $9.2 million cost to the general fund that's ongoing. Those positions that we put in PED and the fire overtime total about $2.7 million. Again, those are ongoing expenditures. So what you're looking at is about a $12 million hit to the general fund. That's an ongoing hit. So what's our challenge? Our challenge is to be able to, one, predict our revenue as well as we can, but to add revenue to that. And we've already started working on some of those areas where we could do that, but to strategize that moving forward. This subcommittee will be heavily involved in that as we move along. We'll also look at wherever fees that we can increase and things like that we can help address this on the revenue side. And then we'll also look at efficiencies that can happen on the expenditure side. So with that, that's my parting doom and gloom. That's what CFOs get to do, the negative Nelly. So there you go. And for that, any questions that you have, I will do my best to answer.
No, I appreciate that, Alan. And obviously it's meaty topics, and we've been able to ask some questions as we go through it. So let me check and see, John, if you want to kick off questions first.
Thanks, Mayor. So the one thing I had a question about is in slide 7, we as far as how granular we might want to get. I'm with the STRs as part of the occupancy tax, just like we did with cannabis industry, even though we are treating it like any other retail business in essence, as far as our approvals, it is a line item on that slide. And I'm wondering, given the changes in STRs of people registering and it's new that we would be, those revenues would be starting to increase. Is there any value in adding a line item for STRs to kind of track this newly blooming industry in Santa Rosa, or is it just something that you can mention anecdotally, or even put on a side panel like you did with the RPTT? I'm just wondering if there's any value in separating the STRs from occupancy.
Yeah, absolutely. And with anything that we get that's a new revenue that comes in, we're going to want to take a look at it and go. I don't, and we have the ability, I believe, to segregate that revenue out. In fact, I know we do. We've done it before, so we can do that. And I think that it's an important data point to go forward not only on the permit side, which we absolutely have a line item for with that, but also to break out the TOT revenue as well. Quite honestly, I think that we would see probably more revenue on the TOT side than on the permit side. So we can put one of those side bullets there, and we will do that in the third quarter and going forward.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm not looking to get more granular. Where it isn't really necessary, but this one I think deserves a little extra attention given all the attention it's getting in our community.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Tom?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Hey, Alan, can we use this as an example? Based on just doing the quick math from slide 9 and 10, we have revenue increases of 9.5 million, adjustments of 8.2. So if we're at year end, and this is tied into what do we do if we have a budget surplus? So if you're going to be the negative Nancy, I'm going to say, okay, optimistically, we have more revenue. And we had talked about those different buckets of money. So if at the end of the year, let's just say, would this mean we have 1.3 million of unallocated funds? And then we can make the decision, do we want to pay down the pension obligation or those other buckets, capital improvement? Is that what we may be having done at the end of the fiscal year?
Absolutely. That is the point of it. And the city manager and I have talked about this. And I think going forward, increases, whether they be for in our fiscal stability buckets or new programs that the council may want to do or needs from the department would happen, from a timing standpoint, it would be around the October timeframe when we have our books closed and we know exactly where we ended the year. And we would be looking at that operating surplus from that year as the funds that would drive all those decisions.
Okay, and when would we have more discussions about how many buckets? And I know we had talked about some percentages. Okay, the first 50% goes to pension obligation, whatever. When would we be having those discussions?
Right, so shortly, very shortly. In fact, the next item on this agenda, I'll give a brief update of where we are with one of those. And then it's going to be on future agendas going forward. So that is, I've set the goal of having those in place by the end of this fiscal year. So, but I think that I really do think it's doable because it's some of the things that you've talked about before of leveraging existing policies that deal with replacement, that deal with things like that. And to be able to see how those fit with, say, large capital replacement or, infrastructure, deferred infrastructure maintenance, and how we do that. The challenge is going to be deciding how much goes in to those buckets and then what stays there for that just goes into the unassigned reserves that can then be used by the council and to go toward other types of projects that don't fit in those three buckets, and it may end up only being two buckets. We are cognizant to not hamstring the council on this. We think that it's important that we be strategic and look far into the future and to be able to set ourselves up for that. But we also know the reality of programs and projects that come up, and we need to have the flexibility with the council to be able to respond to that. So that's how we're trying to do that, and you will see on future agendas where those will be.
Great. Now look forward to those conversations. Thanks.
Yep.
John?
Thank you, Mayor. Well, what Tom just said, I think is really important. And I think we all share the value of those strategic decisions and policies. And even though not unlike the real property transfer tax that got slowly but surely eaten away from what some believe was the original intent and some were less certain, but if we are able to impress on future councils the importance of those strategic decisions and kind of suggest in a way that these dollars are think twice before you invade those buckets, because not having the buckets, if that money's sitting out there, there is a great likelihood that councils will find ways to spend it. And I think if we can impress on future councils through our language and our policies that stresses the importance of funding these buckets, maybe they will tend not to so quickly kind of remove certain funds from those buckets, because we can't control future councils. So all we can do is in language, in policy language and recommendations, try to keep in essence, keep their hands off of it and these are the reasons why. Because if it's there and it looks like it's available, it'll get spent.
Yeah, and just piggybacking on that, I think one of the things that I was particularly interested in hearing about was some of the bigger ticket items, and we'll get into that discussion, but obviously infrastructure is a lot like weight loss for the average person. It takes a long committed effort to actually be effective, and most people don't have the impulse control, and that includes councils in making sure that their spending is right. So anything we can do to sort of lay out what is sort of the long-term expectations and how do we try to keep our baseline there through this type of system on equipment recovery or equipment maintenance, on infrastructure, on pensions, on all of those long-term liabilities, it's helpful. In these mid-year adjustments, and I really appreciate the time that you're taking, Alan, to walk us through it, really lets us see it on sort of the micro level. But I think what I'm hearing from council members also is going 50,000 feet and having the broad conversation as well, because it's important. So I'll go to public comment and see if anybody has any comments and or questions. I'm not seeing anybody raise their hand on Zoom. So Madam Host, do we have any voicemails?
There were no emails received.
Perfect. I'll bring it back for any last comments or thoughts from Tom or John.
Just thanks.
All right, thanks, Alan. Let's go on to the next item.
Alan, you're muted. That's my trick.
Yeah, right. Rubbed off on me, John. So a brief update on where we are with our fiscal policy, specifically related to pension. So we sought proposals from the two firms in California that does Section 115 trusts. We reviewed those, analyzed them, had meetings with both firms, and we've selected one to move forward, and we're starting the contract process with that. So that's just a quick update. We expect the contract process to go rather quickly, or at least hopefully go rather quickly, and then we will, and then the question will be with them is helping us craft how much we put into it initially, understanding that we have that fiscal stability money to be able to go in and seed these buckets initially, and then to develop the policy that will deal with future investments into that, and also what our investment strategy would look like, all of those things as we're going along. So there's still a lot of work to do, but I wanted to let you know that one big chunk of that has been done in that we've selected a firm. We're starting the contract process. We will get through that as quickly as possible and then start into the of making finally that trust happen. And that's all I have.
All right. I know we included some of the discussion in the last one, but I'll see if Tom and John, if you have anything. All right, let's go to public comment. If anybody has public comments for this item, go ahead and hit the raise hand feature on your Zoom. I'm not seeing anybody raise their hands. Madam Host, do we have any emails or correspondence on the item?
No emails were received.
Okay, I'll bring it back, and I'm just looking forward to being able to have this conversation more broadly and with the rest of the council as well. I know that there's a lot of interest, not just from the long-term finance committee members, but I do hear that from other council members as well, wanting to know when sort of this is coming back. But overall, really appreciate your effort and your attention on it, Alan.
Sure.
And did you have any final comments on it, John or Tom?
Nope.
I appreciate the information, keeping us up to date.
Yep.
Excellent. Let me pull back up the rest of my agenda. 1 second here, Alan. I'm having internet issues.
I think that was all that we had on it. If we want to talk about future meetings.
Yeah, next meeting agenda items for item number 5. Go for it.
So, so I'm not sure what we, given the item coming up on the 15th, and I think our regular meeting would be on the February 9th or something like that.
It's the 10th.
The 10th. I'm almost thinking, unless we do a special meeting later in the month, that we forego that meeting, and then in March we focus on the fiscal policies and really look at the other two, and coming up with some methodology to discuss with the committee. I think it would be an opportunity for us to put something forward and to get the comments back and see if if we're on the right track or not, and go from there. So we could a month will give us time as staff to be able to put some stuff together and to be able to have a good, fruitful conversation with y'all.
Yeah, does that work for you too?
Works for me. Makes sense.
I'm due to be in Paso Robles on the 10th. Is there a way to bring it, to have it happen the day before on the Wednesday? What does that do to people's schedules?
So hold on here.
Well, there's no internet in Paso Robles?
Well, I'm probably going to be on the road.
Just kidding. I could do.
John has issues when he has the same setup. I don't want to try to move him and have it work.
We could do it as a special meeting and have it either on the 17th. We'd have to wear green, but or on one of the other days around that. We're not tied to the 10th. It's our normal meeting date. We could do a special meeting on a different one to accommodate that schedule.
And the 17th works for me. I mean, just throwing it out there. The 17th does work for me that following week.
The 17th doesn't work for me. The 9th does.
The 9th? Yeah.
How about you, Mayor?
I have the Climate Action Subcommittee that afternoon on the 9th. Alan, what about the 8th? I know since we're doing a special anyway, we do not have a council meeting set for Tuesday, the 8th, though I suspect council members probably have that time reserved on their calendar, just out of hand.
Yeah, we can do that.
It is unfortunately reserved for that, for something special like you're suggesting.
All I gotta say is ouch, but yeah.
Well, I would agree with the ouch, but you know, but I can't be picky now that I'm screwing it up in the first place, and I apologize.
All right, so we will shoot for a special meeting on the 8th. Appreciate the accommodation. Let's go ahead and go and see if there's any public comment on future agenda items. And now this discussion of the rescheduling to make sure that we can accommodate John. All right, I see no hands. Madam Host, any emails?
No emails were received.
All right. With that, then we'll go ahead and adjourn. Thank you, Alan. Really appreciate the presentations, and thanks to the council members for being here.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks,
Congratulations once again, Alan, too. Good job.
Thank you very
Well
much.
deserved.
Excellent.
Thank you.
All right, take care.